I love that thing that says, where two or more are gathered in my name, I'm there also. You know, God is right here today. And so, I don't know if I said this to you or to somebody else today, but I wasn't nervous about this because I quoted that passage about I don't need to worry about what to say or what to do because he who sent me will guide me. You know, so I hope God has guided me well enough to get a good video out of this. Well, I'm Joanne Tangedahl. My maiden name was Lindberg, and I have 7 children. My grandfather, his name is Peter J. Lindberg, and he came over from Sweden when he was 11 years old. He came over when he was 11 years old with a brother and a sister. So when they came here, they had to assume a stable last name because in Sweden, they would always change names every generation. Like his name over when he was in Sweden was Per J. Larsson, and his father's last name was Lars. So then the next generation was Lars' son. So when they came over here, they couldn't do that. So they chose the name Lindberg, which was the name of a wealthy German man who their father fought in the war for him. I guess people could pay others to fight in the war for them back in those days. And so that's the name they adopted, and I think that's really interesting. He died a month before I was born. And for some reason, I always felt close to him, like he was close to me. I don't know why that was, but because I'd never really met him. But his wife, my grandmother, and her name is Mary Emmeline, and it was Williams, and then became Lindberg. And she was a sweet, lovely woman, and she lived in Illinois, and she was a teacher, a second grade teacher until she was, and she was 30 years old when they married. So I think my grandfather went down to work for her father or something, and that's how they met, like during some season, you know. So he came down as the helper, and they met. They started corresponding with each other, and then he asked her to marry him, and so she got on a train and went down to Kansas, and they got married, and they lived there and had 5 children. And she was 30 years old, which was really old for those days. It's not anymore, but in those days it was kind of remarkable. And I remember she used to say about him, he was so sweet. He was so sweet to me, she'd tell me. And so maybe that's part of the reason I felt close to him, is because of that. And my mother's parents, I didn't really know. My mother's name was Jo Leverett. Actually, she had several names, but several marriages and several names and things, and so. But that's what we refer to as Jo Leverett in the last days. And her father was George Washington Curry, and her mother was Mary Anna Wallace. The grandmother, her mother, was half Cherokee Indian, and they had a tumultuous marriage, and he'd had a marriage before and a marriage after, so there were a lot of family members and everything, you know, involved in that. And so she had a very hard childhood, I think, a very, very hard childhood, made it hard for her to be a mother, really. anyway, so my parents got married. My dad used to tell the story. His name is Art Lindbergh, Herbert Arthur Lindbergh. And he told the story that she used to work in a 5 and 10 cent store, and he saw her there, and he said, "That's the woman I'm going to marry." And so they got married. They had me, and they had my brother, Jerry, who's an important part of my life, Jerry Lindbergh. And their relationship was hard, too. It was back in the Depression, time. And so when I was about 3.5 years old, they divorced. And so my mother took me and we went to Arizona to be with her aunt and uncle. So I was away from my father, and my father was the person I was bonded to, because my mother was really not easy to bond to. And I had a picture of him. I still have it right over there on the table. A little picture of him that I used to carry as this little girl, and I'd keep it under my bed. I had a little brown cardboard suitcase, and I would keep it in there and look at it and just dream about him and everything. And so my aunt told me that he came one time to try to get me, and Uncle Charlie ran him off, But when I was 6.5, my mother had remarried, and sometimes, I'd be staying with Mama Hazel and Charlie, her aunt and uncle. And she called my father in Santa Fe, New Mexico at that time, and said, "You can have Joanne if you'll come get her." And so that's when he found his friend that had the vegetable truck, and so they drove from New Mexico and down to the Los Angeles bus depot. And I remember sitting there as a little girl, and I was just longing for him, because I had this picture in my mind, and I can still see him walking across that Los Angeles bus depot, and he had a mustache, and it was like shocking to me as a little girl. But he got me, and he took me back to New Mexico, and where I got to be raised by my grandmother and him and my little brother, Jerry. And I'll start like when I was 6.5, and my father brought me home, because that's when I came home and started school. And that was so exciting to me, and also strange, because I hadn't been around my father, and it was just different. And before I left, my cousin had tried to cut my hair. I had cut it, those little Buster Brown things, and so it wouldn't be even. So then she'd start that way, and then it wouldn't be even. So she had my hair a mess. So my dad took me to his barber shop to get my hair straightened, and I was so embarrassed, being a little girl in a barber shop. And then the next thing he did was buy me a little red cellophane raincoat that I could wear to school. And probably the next day I started school. It was just like I came from California, where we were at the time, when my father brought me back. And I just started school immediately. And I have loved school ever since. I've just loved school. And so then I went through the elementary schools, and we moved several times in Santa Fe around to different places, and so I went to different schools. My little brother came along and started going to school with me, and that was really wonderful. And then we started going to Santa Fe High School, and that was really important to me, because my Uncle Bob maybe it was Uncle Gene, maybe it was both of them, had gone to Santa Fe High School, to that very building. They used to tell me about it when I was a kid. And so it's torn down now and moved. It was just a couple of blocks from the plaza in Santa Fe. And I remember when I was a little girl, I would get right out of recess, my little friend and I, we would run to they had little bars out there where you could get your place on the bar and hang by your knees. And so we'd hang by our knees most of the recess. But that was really a lot of fun. It was neat. I had some good experiences, some bad experiences. I remember when I was in the 4th grade, I think it was, the teacher asked us to write. We read Through the Looking Glass, and the teacher asked us to write down what we thought about it. So I wrote Alice in Wonderland, that's what it was. And so I wrote what I thought about it. And so she got up in front of the class and read my paper and made fun of it. Oh my gosh. I really learned back then, figure out what the teachers need and give it to them. Because they say they want you to share their your own opinion, but she shamed me for it. And so that wasn't a very good experience. But Jerry and I were both very thankful that we got to graduate from high school there, because our father, Grandpa Art, didn't graduate from high school. He was like, maybe got through the 11th grade, and then his family moved, and for some reason he couldn't go ahead and graduate that year. So that was always kind of like a thing in our family, that he didn't get to graduate. So it was really important for us to stay stable enough that we could graduate from Santa Fe High. And so we were able to do that. That was pretty cool. Because when we were younger, we moved around a lot. So that was really good. And then when I was able to go back to school, after I had my children, I loved it. I loved it. I loved walking on the campus. I loved learning. It was just thrilling to me. And people would ask me, how in the world can you raise 7 children and go to school? And I'd say, well, it's fun for me, And so it was really good. My school experience was an important part of my life. So I've ever been grateful for that, because I always think, what would have happened to me if I would have not been able to come back and be with them, and I would have stayed being raised by my mother, because that was her life was a pretty stressed, tumultuous kind of life. And it would have affected me, I know. So I think a lot of who I am, I see myself as kind of like peaceful and calm and loving, has affected my whole family. And one of the things we do is we call ourselves a family of love. It's really cool. There are just whole stories about that I could tell, but but I think a lot of it comes from my father and my grandmother, and all my father's brothers are, and he had one sister too, and all their children are have this kind of this sweet nature to them. So, some people are just born with anger, or some families are just kind of angry families, or some families are kind of fearful families of everything. And I'm just so blessed that my family is, like I named it, a family of love. And I think about my 7 children. I'd like to say their names, just Michael Joseph, and then Daniel Herbert, and Mary Eloise and Teresa, Joanne, she's the one that's passed away, and Margaret Ann, and Catherine Susan, and Matthew Maynard. Those are my babies. They're still my babies. And one of the things I experience is the most thing I enjoy in the world is being around them. I feel like it's such an honor to get to be in their presence. And when I would tell my friends about something like that, they would say, "Oh, I know why they're such a neat family. It's because of you." And I can admit that a little bit of it may be up to me because of the way I raised them and just the way I am. But each one of them is so individual, and they have good boundaries and good values, and they're interesting people. None of them are perfect, and our family is certainly not perfect. We've had lots of hard things to deal with. But what happens is this family comes together, and they come together and deal with things. And it's just been a blessing of my life just to be around them and get to know them. They're all such individual people. And now I've got a whole bunch of grands and great-grands. So we start out with 7 children in a family. It just really grows. Maynard and I, my husband, we were married for 23 years, and we had a wonderful marriage for most of those years. Just people used to call us the Mutual Admiration Society because we really loved each other and supported each other, and it was really wonderful going through, having all those children and creating a family and everything. It was really neat. But then when we got to be, I guess, in our 40s, we both went through that middle-age crazy stuff, and our marriage just couldn't maintain through that. But I've always loved him, hold him in my heart. He died like in 2015. But I think that having that love and that family, we used to eat meals together and everything, gave the children a good start. I really think that was important. And so raising the children was really interesting, because we were so busy with so many things, as they got school age. Well, I want to say something before then, because someone was just asking me the other day when I learned to drive. And when I actually learned to drive in high school, but it didn't ever take really. And because my brother would drive me, and then Maynard would drive me around and everything. And so I didn't drive till I had 5 children. And so I just think back on how did we get to all these doctor's appointments and grocery shopping and all the things you have to do without me driving. But one of my good friends came over one day and said, "We're going to go out and you're going to learn to drive." And so I started driving then, but I had 5 babies. And so, that was really different. But anyway, all those kids growing up was hectic and interesting and wonderful all at the same time. You know how it goes. I know there were times I would get upset and go throw myself on the bed and cry a little bit, then wipe my tears off and go back and be a mama, just the way it goes. And as they got older, they were all the busiest kids. They were all into something, twirling or band or Sea Scouts or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or, this and that and the other. And so I was constantly taking him one place or another. It's a good thing I learned to drive, I guess. I had never thought about that before. But what we really lost it when I went back to school, you know, and I started questioning my faith, stuff like that. And then I went to different churches, and as my daughter was dying, this is an important thing in our family, as my daughter was dying, 13 members of the family got baptized. She was just the most spiritual, lovely person. She taught us how to live, and she taught us how to die. You know, she was just an interesting, full of life person. You know, since she was a baby, you know, she was, and so a lot of us got baptized again, and I got baptized with my son Matthew. And so I've got pictures of that if we want that in there. And because that was a very, very, very special time. Yeah, that was a very, very special time. It was a horrible time and a wonderful time all at the same time because she was dying. And one of the interesting things that happened was one of my granddaughters, Ray, called a family meeting for us to get together. And so we got together, and Teresa and her husband at their house, the whole family. I mean, all the brothers and sisters, not the kids, but the brothers and sisters. And they told us about what the doctor had said. And we all had our Bibles, and we shared a verse or whatever we wanted to share out of that, and we also watched the Passion of the Christ at that time. It was a very spiritual time of gathering with our family. So from that time on, we started having family meetings, praying for Teresa and everybody else for her recovery. It was a very, very special time. But of course she didn't live. She lived like a year and a half from that point. And we would, as she got closer to death, we would go and stay with her. Even the boys, we'd all take turns going and staying with her. And it was really hard, but it was really wonderful. She was so present and alive until, the very last day. And the last thing she wrote in her journal was, I am content in my present circumstances. That's like St. Paul, said. So she was really something else. We'd come up there to see her, and she'd say a prayer for us. I was kind of concerned about the guy I was working with and our new contract and things like that. So she prayed for me, and here she was, just so close to death. And she did that for other members of the family. It was really wonderful. Sometimes several of us would be there and we'd sing, around her bed. It was a very, very important time. And it changed, I think it changed our family. It made us all much more spiritual. There's different levels of being spiritual. And I keep growing in that as I go along. And so it's kind of hard in some ways to think back on that time. My kids every Christmas would create a Christmas play. One time they even had Dan, my son that's going to have his birthday, be the donkey, So, and they'd get up and they'd sing and they'd do this. And so Grandpa Ray would record this, and he was really, really neat for the kids. Then my father, Grandpa Art, he had a cleaning route. And so what he would do is on Saturdays, he'd take one of the boys on his route with him, let him go to work, work with him. And so So he did that first with my oldest son, and then with Danny, and then with Matthew. And he'd maybe give him a quarter or 50 cents for working and stuff. And I think that was so good for them to have, their grandpas around to help them and guide them and things. And one of the funny stories that we laugh at is Danny was working with him one time, and my dad would haul these big old sacks full of laundry from the hospitals and things. And Danny said, "Grandpa, you're the strongest old man I've ever seen." We've laughed about that through the years. And sometimes my mother would come and stay for a while. Sometimes Maynard's mother would come and stay for a while. And sometimes my aunts and uncles would come. But that was really nice for the family, I think, too. Just having all those relatives come and the different experiences that they brought into the family. And when Matthew was in kindergarten, that's my youngest son, I went back to school. All the kids were in school, so I went back to school. And I was able to get my BA and my master's degree. And before that time, growing up, I didn't have an idea at all that I could go to school. It was just not in the realm of possibility for me. I thought my brother should go. I tried to talk him into going. He did eventually become an electrical engineer. But when I got the chance, I just loved it. And so I was raising the kids. They were all bigger. Matthew, the littlest one, was in kindergarten. And so I would go to school while they were at school. And I got my bachelor's degree and then my master's degree. And that's when I started working. So I had, a lot of years raising these children, and then 40 years as a therapist. And it was really, I always thought, this is my soul's work. It's kind of what I thought to myself, because I loved what I did. Work was just not really like work. It was really pleasing to me, and I learned so much. My friends and I will talk about, I have a very good friend. We have coffee every Monday morning, and she was my friend since we were 21 years old. So we've had coffee together for years, and it's like she knows my history and I know hers. We know each other's children and love each other's children. And so one of the things we talk about is so thankful with our spiritual growth, our spiritual life, and our therapist's life, because it helps us to be able to handle whatever comes up. Because, stuff is still coming up. No matter that I'm 86, I'm not finished. It's like life is a learning experience, isn't it? I remember once reading this book, and it said, I could just see it right now, and it was the first line in the chapter, and it said, life is a problem-solving process. And because there's always, things that come up. But I think happiness comes out of how you deal with it, and because you could get upset and mad and be resentful for years or something. And so having the skills to know how to deal with the problems that are going on is really a cool thing. And so I credit that to my upbringing, to my spiritual life, to being a therapist, and all that's really important. I actually wrote 2 books. I wrote one book called A New Blueprint for Marriage, and the second book was called On Being Single, because at the time I wrote it, that's been so many years ago that there weren't singles until that period, and there became so many divorces and so many people single. And so there wasn't very much information about that. So it was about on how to take care of yourself, how to communicate with people, how to, what to do on holidays when you're alone and you don't have a spouse, how to get your self-esteem back, because sometimes it's very hard for people when divorce is just hard on us. We human beings bond so deeply. It's just amazing. We're very complex, and so when we bond like that, then you part, and a lot of times you just feel like there's something wrong with you, that I couldn't stay married and that kind of thing. So just learning how to, and a lot of it had a spiritual bent to it, about how to turn toward God and to develop your spiritual life and all that too. So that was very interesting too. It was a lot of fun being single. I loved it when I was married, and I also loved it when I was single. So that's very interesting. Speak and listen is so important, because it just helps a relationship so much. In the Imago workshops, we used to call it the dialogue, where you would share something with the partner and the partner would mirror it back to you and then could respond. And that way you really get two people talking and understanding each other, because most of the time we don't really listen to other people. We're waiting in the wings just so we can talk. In fact, sometimes I would even interrupt, just to get my words in. So it takes some real skills and practice to learn how to listen right. I used to say that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's why we need to listen twice as much as we talk. And so that's good. And I loved working with people, and I loved the education I got. Went to lots of workshops and trainings and things, in my profession, and learned so many different techniques, to work with people. And it was amazing to me. I loved it. I loved my work, and I loved working with people and helping them to move to a better place. I used to have friends who tell me, I don't see how you could be a therapist listening to people's problems all day. And what I would tell them is, I don't think of it as that. It's like I'm listening to this person, and then I get to see them change and grow, And so it was interesting and cool and exciting to me. I loved that. So I think when I was raising the children, I was as involved in that too. They were interested and exciting and always changing and growing and everything. So, and now, that I'm retired, my friend and I that have coffee, we talk about aging and how to age well, and so this is an exciting and growing and changing time too, and it's amazing, really. So all the children got a biblical name, Michael, and Daniel, and Mary, and Teresa, Margie, Catherine, not Margie, it's Margaret, Catherine, and Matthew. So those were all their biblical names. And then we'd add some name that we loved, that was to go with it. Teresa got my name, Teresa Joanne, and then Matthew got Matthew Maynard. And Danny got after my father, Herbert. So he's Daniel Herbert. My father was Herbert Arthur. so that's kind of how they came out. they all were such individuals and so interesting. My oldest son was in Scouts for years, and that was a really important part of his growth, I think. He's been a very successful man. I don't know if this is appropriate for me right at this point to say this, but right here where I live, I was renting this. I moved here in 2001, and I was renting this place from my next door neighbor. And so she decided a couple of years ago, she decided that she wanted to sell it. And it had become my home. I just loved this place so much. And so I went to the kids and I said, that she wants to sell it. I was wondering if any of you would want to invest in this as an investment so that I could stay here. And so they all started together. We were all texting. They all started talking and figuring out how they could do it and going and finding property values and this and that. They were so cute. And so finally my oldest son called me and he said, "Mom, Shirley and I were talking and we just have the money laying around." Of course, that's not true, but they said, "We just have the money laying around and we'd like to go ahead and buy it, but I don't want to hurt the other kids' feelings." And I said, "Well, what if I call them and tell them that you called and would want to buy it?" So then I did that. And so then they started saying, "Oh, Mike and Shirley, you're so wonderful," and everything else. And so that has been a wonderful thing for me, that he has bought this house, or he and Shirley have bought this place for me where I can live here as long as I want to now. And so I'm really happy with that. And that's probably a little bit of a story about the kind of a person he was. He always worked hard. All the kids did. They always got jobs as early as they could, working at Taco Bueno or someplace, And the boys would shine shoes, worked at a barber shop and shined shoes. Mike did that for a while, and then as Danny got a little bit older, he came in and he did that. And Mike probably moved on to something else. But they were always doing things like that, all the kids. And they just kept me busy. I would tell them, "You need to stay home and study. You don't need," but they wanted to work. And I think that's been really good for them too. They were all babies at once, and they were all little school-age children, and then they were in high school, and then they were adults. Now they're all grandpas and grandmas, and it's all kind of like I had a big handful. And we were going to the Catholic Church back then, and I would get them all dressed to go take them to church, and I would even take them on the holy days of obligation, which is in the middle of the week. It's for certain days. Dress them all up and take them by myself, because Maynard wasn't there then. And so they were good. They were all so good. They'd be squirming around in the seats and everything, but they were good. Those kids, a lot of good memories of raising them. Teresa and Margie were in the band at high school, and several of them played different instruments. I think Teresa played the clarinet and Margie played, I don't know what she played, the flute? I think the flute maybe. But they got to go to to Florida to go to one of the bowl games. And that was really a big deal that they got to do that. So there was always things like that going on. Always something. And then we used to camp a lot. With a big family, you don't have that much money, and so we would go camping, and we'd go camping out at a lease, that they had for hunting. So we'd go camp out there. Then some years we go camping at the beach almost every week. And then we built a lake house out on Double Lakes. And so we would go out there and we would camp out there until we built a house. And that was a lot of fun. It was a good way. And we have a lot of family stories about these different adventures. If we get together as a family, we sit around and tell those stories. Like one time we were camping on Galveston, at Galveston, and I think we'd just eaten, and all of a sudden, it was like all of a sudden, here came this storm. And it was so bad that it just started blowing everybody's tent down and everything. We had a little camper, a pop-up camper, and Maynard told me and the girls to get in there. And so we went in the camper really quick, and he and the boys went to the next person's tent because it had blown down and they were in it and everything. Helped get that everything. Then we came back and we started packing everything up, and we left like everybody else. There was just a line of traffic going out of Galveston. And it was really something, and to come up so fast like that. And then on the way home, I think it was like our side mirror hit a horse that was out just wandering around kind of in that storm. And we had to get out of the car and go find the horse and try to take it back to somebody, try to find where it lived and everything. It was an adventurous camping trip. But things are like that as they're growing up. We went out to Bolivar, and we were camping there. That's a little further out. We were camping there, and we pulled in the evening. So we pulled in and got set up, and then it was dark. And so in the middle of the night, here came all these cows. A whole herd of cows came, all mooing around. We had a camper, and so the one mother was try to get across over here to get to her baby, and it was just the awfulest thing. And so finally my husband had just about enough of it. He got out of the car and was going to shoo him away, and he said, I started shooing him like this, and I looked over there and I saw the male looking at him. And so he said he just turned and ran, and he looked back, and the male had just turned and ran too. And so it was just a funny experience. So, life is full of stories like that for our family. Just really wonderful ones. And they first started saying, okay, when you're 80, we want to give you a really big party and everything. I said, I don't want one. They said, well, we're going to anyway, and you can come if you want to. But anyway, here's the invitation that they sent out. And it was, my friends tell me it was better than any reception, bar mitzvah, or anything they've ever been to. And on the wall, this is one of the things they had on there. We are a family of love. And that's, from what we got. And see the little leaves there. Then people could come up and sign their name on a leaf and put it on the tree. It was the coolest thing. Everything about this was just wonderful. And my kids, here's a picture of them. they each got up and said the most wonderful things in the world about me to all my friends. There were probably 200 people at this gala. Isn't that amazing? And it was so thrilling to me. And then each one of the kids said, I got down things that they said. The grandchildren wrote things, and each one of them shared with me. And then they had each table decorated with pictures throughout my life, like when I was a little girl. My first baby is a little black baby that I loved. It's my first doll. And just different stages in my life. It's a little high school girl, a school-age girl, therapist, just different. And so they had those, one of my sons had gotten branches and painted them all white, and so they had them on every table, and then they had these pictures hanging on them. They must have worked themselves crazy just to create this wonderful gala. It was just so wonderful. Let's see, where was this other? I lost it. This cake that they made. One of my granddaughters-in-law made this. She's just a wonderful artist and baking artist. And then here's like some pictures of see the white leaves? Then they had pictures hanging on there. Here's a beautiful table. Here were my little grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and all their mamas and daddies taught them to sing "You Are My Sunshine" to Gigi. I'm called Gigi as great-grandma, and so they would all sing to me, and that's a picture of them, my children. And then this is a cool thing. This is a blanket they got me with everybody's pictures on it. Isn't that cool? So I still have that. So it was a wonderful time, So they're saying, okay, now what are we going to do for your 90th birthday? I don't want a party. This is my precious daughter that died, Teresa. And this is her album, the song that she wrote. And we can play it if you need to, but here's the words to it. We're a family of love. We are bound together as one. Try to divide us, what can prevail? Because love never fails. Love is patient, love is kind, love does good every time. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. Love never fails, love never fails. That meant so much to me, The whole family loves that. Now, I think I like this. This was our marriage and our parents. Maynard's parents and my parents. And then this was our brother-in-laws. And this is important because these two guys, when they were young, worked in That Wright's food store in Santa Fe, and they became friends, and that's how Maynard and I met. So they started it all. And they were so cute when they were young. They were just the cutest things. This is my son Matthew and his wife Lori, and they recently went to Santa Fe, and there was the St. Francis Cathedral behind them where we got married. This is the picture of my father that I had as a little girl. That's a very picture that I took with me when I was 3.5 and left my father. And then he came and got me when I was 6.5, just starting school. But he had a mustache. Here's pictures. Here's that same little picture with me as that little doll, and little baby pictures. And then here's Jerry and I as children, and this other one here. So several pictures of different stages of my life, kind of. And here's how I was as a young mother, you know, getting ready for church, I think. And then some of being a therapist, some of them here, like probably there's me at my desk. As a little girl, teenager. So just different pictures. And so this was my mother, Grandma Jo, we called her. This was the one that was interesting of Valley Ranch. I think that's very interesting because it's really well known in Santa Fe these days as a monastery. People go there for workshops and things. And my grandmother's brother, Uncle Ace, bought that. You can imagine how much he paid for it. Probably nothing much, but I just love it, you know, with the horses and everything. So I love this little tintype of my grandmother. I don't know holding it if that's the right thing to do or not. The story dolls are made by the Pueblo Indians, and they, the women, I think, are the ones that make the story dolls. And they're expensive. And they're all numbered and everything, so that when I would go to Santa Fe to visit, I would get one, you know, and just because it reminded me of Santa Fe, you know, it just touches my heart, something about, that's where I grew up, and it's a very spiritual place to me. So when I go back to Santa Fe, it just really touches me somehow. You know, the very light that I walked by when I was a teenager, I can remember at night when I was a teenager walking by that plaza, that very lamp or clock that's right there on the corner is still there. At least the last time I went, it was still there. And it just, you know, there's something about that that just touches you, that through time, you know. And it just, I guess it brings up memories a lot like what's happening with me. Going through this program is just bringing up memories and thoughts. And like I told you, I've been living in my history, which is good. Just a good history. Here's my crosses. My spiritual life, my life with God and Jesus is very important to me, as you can see. And then we could go back here and maybe take a shot of this. I don't know if you can get it here or not, but I love this one. My aunt that we stayed with, my mother and I stayed with my aunt and her husband, Uncle, his name was Charlie, and he had a wooden leg, and that was the most interesting thing to me. And I remember we had some puppies, and he cut off the tails of the puppies, you know, like they do. And so then I gathered them up. I loved those, and I kept carrying them around for a long time. And then later on, I heard little girls are sugar and spice, you know, and little boys are puppy dog tails, you know. And I thought, I love puppy dog tails. And I was a little girl. But anyway, so here my father came to the bus depot and got me when I was 6.5 years old and brought me home with a vegetable truck. And so I got to be raised with my brother and my grandmother. This is me with my cousin. And this is me before I went, about 3 probably. So it's just a painting that depicts what happened back then. Okay, this is a picture of me and my children. It was taken in 1991. Today we all have gray hair, but so this was me. my oldest son Mike, Danny, Ellie, Teresa, my daughter who passed away, and Margaret Ann, Kathy, and Matthew. Her name's Diana Parker. She goes by Diana Paradise today. She lives in Santa Barbara in California, but she lived here at the time, and I was her therapist. Come, let me show you. This painting she did when I was like, we were doing a session together. That was me as a therapist. That was when I was first a therapist. So this one is 1984. So it's earlier. This one depicts to me how I felt about all these little people. I can remember, as they were born, I would hold them in my hands and I would just pray to God to please help me to know, how to raise this little one, how to take care of them. This is your precious child and I want to do the best that I can. So that one. Then here's one, a picture that painting was made off of. Like I said earlier, I just love being around my family. I've showed you all of them except this one. This is just a picture in 97. It was Christmas of 97 when we were all together. It's not so often that we get everybody together, but it's wonderful when we do. This is Maynard. And even though our marriage didn't last, it was wonderful for a lot of years. There was just a lot of love there. And this is his grandmother and grandfather, Tangedahl. And his name was Maynard Tangedahl. Did I say that? Maynard Tangedahl. And then here's a picture of him with his parents and his brothers and Aunt Edna. And I don't know these, if you can even get a good picture of those or not, but it's Norwegian, and I understand it means Green Valley. Three of my children went with Grandpa Ray, Maynard's father, up to Minnesota where they lived, where his family lived, where he came from, and they got to see Lake Tangedahl. There's a Lake Tangedahl there. And one of the interesting pieces is in my life right now is there's only one little grandson, great-grandson, that'll be able to carry on this name Tangedahl. Even though we had this huge family, but all the girls married, and their names changed. And two of my sons had girls, and the other son had a boy and a girl, and so then his son has had a little boy. So there's only one of them, his little Landon. The whole family's name rests on little Landon. It became it's a project. Every morning I get up, make my coffee, and then I come in and do my texting. But if I don't, one day I missed, and the kids started calling each other, saying, "Have you heard from Mom? Have you heard from Mom?" And so it was a good test to see that it would work. They know I'm okay. I thought, you used to drive all over this country all the time, travel all over the world. I made so many travels all over the world, and you didn't have a phone, but I've just gotten so attached to it that it's important to me. My girls and I have a Bible study that we meet once a month, And I love it so much. It's so wonderful studying something and then hearing their thoughts about it, how it's affected their lives and what it means to them. That just touches me so much. And how it got started was when my daughter was ill, Teresa, that passed away. She said to me, she wanted to get to know Kathy better, her other sister. And so she said, Mom, I think I'm going to find a book that we can do a little Bible study with. And so she did. She found one, sent Kathy a copy. And so they would read things. And every week, every Tuesday, they would get together and, share what they studied. And so then, when she died, we had family prayer meetings all through that year and a half, and even continued on past that. So this was one of the family prayer meetings that we were at after Teresa died. It may have been a year after she died, I'm not sure. But anyway, Kathy opened her Bible and she said, she had this book in it. And she said, this is the book that Teresa and I were studying out of. And we never finished it. And so I would like my sisters to finish it with me. And somehow I got invited too. So anyway, since that time, so she died in 2006. So since that time, once a month we meet and study something. We've gone through several books by now. We usually get one that'll last for a year and then pick out a new one. And right now we're studying Daniel. So that's pretty cool. Like during the life and the text and context, different problems that come up, I give all kinds of advice. But I'm afraid I can't think of a thing. When I'm in the spotlight, but I'm full of advice and wisdom, I think. The one thought that occurs to me is, I believe the most important decision that we ever make is the person that we choose to marry, because they forever affect our lives. You're not single anymore. You're forever affected by this person. Even the jobs, we can change jobs and things. Of course, I guess we can change husbands too, wives, but it really affects you. It's a very, very important and serious decision that you make. It's the person that you choose to marry, I think. Another thought that occurs to me is, it's so important to realize that, the way I say it is that feelings are like the weather report. They come and they go and they change all the time. If you just wait a few minutes, your feelings change. And far too many people act on their feelings. If they're mad, they act on it. If they're sad, they act on it. If they're whatever they're feeling. And to realize that feelings are just information. They let us know what's going on inside of us. But what you want to do is to move from your feelings to what it is you're thinking. What are you telling yourself that create those feelings? Because thoughts create feelings. And so then that's where you make your decisions about how you're going to act, And a lot of times the action is do nothing, or to forgive somebody or something else. But you're better off if you make your decisions on your thoughts than on your actions. But not all our thoughts are good, I've often been said, don't believe everything you think, because we can think some really crazy things. So both of those don't quite seem to go together, but I think they're both valuable. valuable pieces of information. And one of my precious daughters, Kathy, when she was a little girl, she wrote the most she had been painting, watercolor painting, and she painted this whole picture. She turned it over and she spontaneously wrote this poem. And it said something like, be sure to love yourself, that other people can't tell you who you are because you're yourself, and you need to learn to love yourself and not let other people push you around and stuff like that. Was a wonderful little piece of wisdom that came out of this little girl when she was so tiny. And she's still just like that as a grown woman. Amazing what you see in your children when they're little, and then how it lives in them, as adults. It's wonderful to see. Yeah, my most favorite thing in the world is to be around them, to be around the children, just to watch them relating to each other and watch them talking about things, laughing and carrying on, and just dealing with the difficult problems that come up. We've had a lot of difficult problems in our family, but you handle them, you deal with them. You get through it a little bit better if you walk with God, I think. So maybe the most wise thing I could say is keep God close. Just keep God in your thoughts. Don't try to do it alone. My whole life was, I think I'll do it myself. From that little girl I showed you, that little picture of myself feeling like, well, I'll just take care of myself. If my parents can't take care of me, I'll take care of myself. And so I was the kind of person who said, I can do it. If one other person on this earth has done it, I can do it. And I would say, maybe I don't know how to do it now, but I'll figure it out. I can do it. I can handle it. Well, I've had to learn that I need help. I don't have to do it all by myself. My children are there for me. My friends are there for me. And I don't have to do it all. So I think that's part of growing up, is beginning to develop the beliefs that you've carried through life into something that's maybe better, more supportive to you. Not everybody does that, but I think that's good for us if it's a good maturing process of just begin to realize.
We are